Let's try to understand Balducci's assumption a little bit more in detail. We know the assumption is nothing but 1 minus t qx plus t. If t is lying between 0 and 1, I can very well write it as 1 minus t times qx. Right? So this is what we are trying to bring in. So let's see how we can work it out. I want to express tqx in terms of qx. For that, first let me start with px. Right, this px is nothing but a life currently aged x will survive for one more year. So I'll use the principle of consistency correspondence. I will try to write it as px times 1 minus t, or probably yeah, otherwise let me write it as px. I'll write it as p tpx, which is his age is already x plus t. Now that his age becomes x plus t, he is surviving for 1 minus t more period. This I can very well write. So which means for me tpx will become px divided by 1 minus t px plus t. Okay, let me convert everything into q's. Right, I'll write it as 1 minus tqx. This px also I'll write it as 1 minus qx divided by 1 minus of tpx. 1 minus tpx plus t, I'll write it as 1 minus of 1 minus t qx plus t. I can very well write it like this. Right? So which means 1 minus tqx is coming out as 1 minus qx. 1 minus 1 is going up, so 1 minus of 1 minus tqx plus t. Right? And now here I can very well use a Balducci's assumption, because I have already said 1 minus tqx plus t. I can use the Balducci's assumption which says 1 minus tqx. So I'll write it like this. Right? So 1 minus of tqx is equal to 1 minus qx divided by 1 minus of 1 minus t times qx. Now a little bit of rearrangement is something which I can look at. Right? So it becomes tqx. Now when I am looking at tqx, it is nothing but 1 minus of 1 minus qx divided by 1 minus of 1 minus t times qx. Now this I can very well write it 1 minus qx plus tqx minus of 1 minus qx divided by 1 minus of 1 minus t times qx. So this 1 is going off, minus qx plus qx is going off, coming out as tqx t times qx divided by 1 minus of 1 minus t times qx. So this could be a formula wherein I am writing tqx exclusively in the form of qx using the Balducci's assumption. Right? So, I mean, the basic Balducci's assumption will still remain the same as long as I am looking at some t between 0 and 1. 1 minus t qx plus t is getting simplified as 1 minus t times qx. An easier assumption that this works only when t is between 0 and 1. Right?